Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I am very pleased to rise today. Je prends la parole pour parler au sujet de loi sur la sûreté des pipelines. À mon avis, c'est un bon première étape à la direction de la sûreté des pipelines, mais il reste toujours les problèmes. I want to speak to the overall scheme of pipelines in Canada, acknowledging, as I've said, that this is a good first step. There's much more that needs to be done. There are some areas of vagueness in this piece of legislation. And overall, we still have the problem that, and I'll start with this as an overarching concern about the current energy strategy that sees us want to get raw bitumen out of the oil sands, particularly when the price of a barrel of oil was trading internationally at levels that allowed this to be a profitable activity. The strategy appeared to be to get as much raw bitumen out of the ground as fast as possible, shipping it quickly to other places for processing and refining. I take issue with some of the comments that have been made earlier by my friends in this place from both Liberal colleagues and Conservatives. The assumption that getting raw bitumen to other countries is in Canada's best interests or even in Alberta's best interests. It is, in fact, opposed by the major trade union that represents workers in the oil sands, because there's far more jobs to be created in the oil sands if the material is upgraded near the resource and preferably refined near the resource before being stirred in with, diluted, I should say, with the diluent, fossil fuel condensate, which is shipped to Alberta to make the bitumen flowable. It's this combination of bitumen and diluent which would be the product to be shipped under all the controversial current pipelines that we hear about, whether Energy East or Keystone heading south, or the two very controversial and unacceptable projects that British Columbians don't want to see, the Kinder Morgan project or the Enbridge so-called Gateway project. All of these pipelines, all of them, are about getting raw bitumen to Tidewater for refining in other countries. And therefore, we should be questioning the whole strategy. What's missing is actually having an energy strategy, having an actual energy policy in Canada that allows Canadians to know that we're maximizing the benefit of our natural resources and reducing the environmental impact of their exploitation. To maximize value, one of the first principles should be that we get as many jobs as possible out of every ounce of raw material. Whether we're talking about shipping out raw logs from the forest industry, we should oppose that. Whether we're talking about shipping out raw bitumen from the fossil fuel industry, we should oppose that. So that also speaks to the dangers of pipeline spills. And it also speaks to the fact of the danger of tanker spills. Now, under previous legislation, the Safeguarding Our Seas and Skies Act, the current administration has brought up the liability levels for tanker traffic as well. So I just want to note parenthetically that that's, again, where around liability, and the Greens' larger concern around tanker safety is this. Each supertanker is independently and individually incorporated, so that in the event of a catastrophic accident, we can have all the laws in the world that say that they are going to be absolutely liable and they will pay for their damage. But the reality of tanker traffic is that they're very likely to in the case of a major accident with billions and billions of dollars of damage, they're much more likely to go bankrupt and leave Canadians holding the bag. There is, of course, and I don't want to overlook it, there is an international fund into which the industry pays for tanker safety, the Ship Source Oil Pollution Fund. But that's only accessible for up to $250 million per incident. And again, we know from the experience with real disasters in tanker spills, of course the Exxon Valdez being the most notable, still not cleaned up, that tanker accidents can be in the billions of dollars. And that's speaking to our previous history with tankers carrying conventional crude. We know now from the Kalamazoo, Michigan incident involving Enbridge's gross negligence in Kalamazoo, Michigan, that a pipeline rupture with dilbit is virtually impossible to clean up. Dilbit does not behave the way conventional crude does in freshwater environments. We have no experience whatsoever, and I underscore that, with dilbit in the marine environment. as an intervener in the Kinder Morgan hearings, I've read through their evidence where they claim that they have now done experiments which show how dilbit will behave in a marine environment. They actually, believe it or not, took large freestanding tanks in Alberta, added salt to the water, stirred, they said, to replicate wind and wave action, and then poured in dilbit to see how it behaved. That's the sum total of the knowledge base in Canada for how dilbit's going to behave in a marine environment. So unalterably, Greens will oppose putting dilbit in tankers and open waters, and we oppose putting dilbit in pipelines, not just because it will be hard, impossible to clean up, and because the liability limits will not cover the damage, but because every pipeline is intended to take this stuff into tankers, where we know the liability regime won't work because of the corporate structure of offshore oil tankers. And Kinder Morgan and Enbridge and all of them, TransCanada, their liability for the dilbit stops at the end of the pipeline. They ship it into a tanker. It's not their problem. So back to this bill. Let me cover briefly that it really is a good first step in a couple of areas and needs strengthening in others. Where it's a good first step is the polluter pays principle. Enshrining this in law is a good first step. It's also good to see what's called non-use value for public resources being a compensatable category. Non-use value basically means environmental damage can be compensated. As a principle, that's a good step. I have to say some of the later clauses as to how this will come into force is unfortunately rather vague. There are still gaps in terms of how environmental damage will in fact be compensated. But I want to commend the administration for putting forward the concept of non-use value as a compensatable form. And it will create the possibility, it's not for sure, but certainly gives the National Energy Board the potential to create new tools to go after polluters, to get that money back as a result of a spill. It is too discretionary, and I do support the work here of an environmental law group called Eco-Justice, which has done a very good synopsis of the bill for anyone who wants to get a quick review without having to go through the bill in detail themselves. It is too discretionary. It leaves a lot for the National Energy Board to develop their own rules and regulations around how this bill will be implemented. It does have significant gaps. For instance, oil pipelines carrying less than 250,000 barrels will not be covered under this regime. 250,000 barrels, I should clarify, a day. So that's the scale of pipeline that will have the absolute liability. But again, the $1 billion cap is as has been evidenced by quite a bit of the debate here today earlier, not sufficient to cover the full costs of a spill involving dilbit. We know that from the Kalamazoo, Michigan spill, which hit $1.2 billion and has not cleaned up the spill. Parts of the Kalamazoo River remain contaminated. The other part of the bill that needs more work is that it doesn't impose absolute, unlimited absolute liability. There are ways in which, with the capping and additionally with other provisions the NEB can bring forward, that will be limited. Bear in mind that this bill is taking away what existed under the Fisheries Act, where the government had the ability to recover the cleanup costs for a pipeline spill to the full costs under the Fisheries Act. So in certain circumstances, we already had some provisions that would make a pipeline owner face unlimited absolute liability. That liability regime is now gone, and I just want to quote from the legal opinion of Eco-Justice. No liability regime can truly and comprehensively be termed a polluter pays regime unless and until polluters are made absolutely liable for the full costs of environmental harm. Mr. Speaker, I do think that this bill represents a good first step, even with the criticisms that I've included in this presentation this afternoon. I will be voting for this bill. I want to make that clear. But I would like to see the work done to improve and fill the gaps, to make it less discretionary, and overall in this debate, which is often a dialogue of the deaf on the subject of pipelines, I'd like us to focus more on what's in the pipelines. If it's dilbit, we shouldn't be shipping it at all. Dilbit requires a two-way flow of toxics. First, you have to ship the diluent, which in Enbridge's submission to the NEB, they said they'd be buying their fossil fuel condensate from the Middle East. So from Saudi Arabia, tankers would come all the way around, go through the tricky channels into Kitimat to put it in the the western end of the Twin Pipeline, ship the diluent from Kitimat into Alberta, stir it in, and then ship it west. Mr. Speaker, that is a cockamamie scheme. I appreciate the attention of this House, and this bill is a good first step, but the whole scheme needs review.